How to build a B2B startup marketing engine from scratch. Welcome back to a fresh episode of BreakingB2B.com. I'm your host, Sam Dunning, and if you want to join thousands of legends enjoying past podcast episodes, to check out our daily email B2B marketing newsletter tips, or to apply to work with us, head over to BreakingB2B.com. So we're diving into the importance of marketing when it comes to your B2B startup, how to build up that marketing engine from scratch, how to work with limited resources to drive pipeline and revenue and take on giant competitors. I've got Rachael Merritt, the Director of Product over at Wildsparq. Rachael, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hi. Hey, everyone. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Big podcast fan. So
Yeah. Excited to have you on. So as we always do, Rachael, we're diving straight into the topic at hand. So I know you've got hands-on experience at Wildsparq and other startups that you've worked at, kind of building up that marketing machine from the ground up. So getting back to basics, what is the importance of marketing when it comes to B2B, especially at startup companies?
wow. Yeah. I think, the startups that I've worked at were always sales driven first, which I think is great. And really just built out the bare minimum marketing elements that they needed, whether they tried to do them themselves and figure them out or outsourced a segment of the work to a branding agency or a marketing agency before they really laid a sales process and foundation and then brought on someone to build out the marketing team. So I've been doing startup marketing for about 6 years now. And then prior to that, I did nonprofit marketing, which is very similar. You're asked to do a whole lot with very little. And most people are usually bought into this greater cause or mission, like you find often too with startups. So I've always had to do a lot with a little. But so in building out, I've been very fortunate though that in the startups, and they've always been B2B tech startups that I've worked for, they were organizations that they had salespeople who were really boots on the ground, right? They didn't have any expectation that there would be a massive influx of inbound from day one, but they picked up the phone, they cold called, they were grinding, as we say at Wildsparq, and really built a great core audience. And then marketing can just come and add fuel to the fire. So it's been a wild ride, just learning how to do a lot with a little, but I don't think I would have it any other way, right? Like if I had gone and started my career off at super large, well-funded organizations, I probably wouldn't have learned how to be as scrappy or,
Yeah. I love it. I'm much the same. Like I don't think I've ever been at a large scale organization where I've been given or handed a massive budget to manage. I'm much the same, coming from generally small businesses and having to like you mentioned there, get scrappy, get creative, think outside the box, work with very little and almost do as much as you can with either a limited budget, limited outside resource, or doing as much as you can internally with yourself or your own team. So love that way of looking at things. How is it when did you say most of the companies that you've been with have had a sales team already and then marketing's come on board later? What's that like? Is there like much resistance from the sales team? Are usually welcomed with open arms, or what's that like?
Yeah. So I also feel very fortunate that I see like so many marketing memes and sales memes and jokes and things like that on LinkedIn that make me laugh. And certainly there have been moments where like an acute situation has created a little bit of tension between sales and marketing and who takes the lead and those types of things. But really fortunate that like both of the startups I've worked for have been under really strong leadership. They've hired well, they've hired to character. And so, yeah, I haven't really experienced a ton of that. Like somebody the other day, he's a big influencer on LinkedIn. He's like, oh, I got invited to a marketing conference and marketing hates sales. And I was like, what? So I think we get a little bit of a bad rap, and probably at some bigger companies that happens. But yeah, no, I think they were all, I think both companies that I've been at too, they were always at a point where they're like, hey, we're exhausting all of our resources with outbound and it's
Mm,
time. And so I was welcomed with open arms. And um, I think the thing that I was able to drive with them was like, let's be courageous, right? Like, what do we have to lose? Let's go after our competitors and really show how we're a better value, and how we solve their problems or how they create problems for them that our platform doesn't create, right? And so all of my experience with sales has been a great relationship. I learn a lot from them. The first startup that I worked for, I was really just working with one individual, and he was just
okay.
bought in a wonderful human being. And then the next one, it's just a group of people who like have exhausted all their resources, but they're still hungry. And that is an element of working for a startup too that I think is important. Like having people on the team who are hungry and who will hustle. Like at
Mm,
Wildsparq, that is a big part of who we hire, right? Like we want somebody who's a great culture fit in terms of their character and that is bought in on the mission, because our mission is to build multiplying movements of multiplying leaders, which essentially just means leaders who build more leaders, like leaders who serve the people they lead, knowing it's not about them, it's about the people, right? So I have been fortunate in that regard, but I don't know. I would say that both times, I think I just came in the first 90 days with a willingness to learn and
okay.
just a level of humility and eagerness to learn from them and have a posture of how can I help versus like coming in and burning everything to the ground and acting like, I think if you take a posture of I'm the expert here, that's probably where that tension between sales and marketing happens. But I think sometimes that stuff exists in the culture to begin with, and you can't overcome it. But haven't had to deal with that yet. So just really a posture of how can I help, and how can I take what you're doing and elevate it, and to supplement what you're already doing.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So when you came on board as one of the first marketing hires, if not the first, was there much pressure put on yourself? Like, were you given kind of certain targets, or what did that look like? Interested to know.
Yeah, I actually think that the first time I did a really good job of like collaborating with sales to even try and set a target, right? Because sometimes with a startup, you just don't know. Like there have been companies I've talked to, maybe I was considering for like part of my tech stack or something, and they've asked me like, "Oh, how many inbounds do you get per week or per month?" And like, you know, there have been times when it's been all over the board, right? And so to be able to just sit down with sales and come up with some like goals with them
Mm,
has always been the approach for me. And I will say, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't want to wander aimlessly, right? And so looking at previous inbound activity, looking at like previous things that agencies have done and how that drastically changed, I think, too, with some of the iOS privacy changes that came out and how that affected retargeting and certain types of digital marketing, right? Like there were times where we just sort of set a moving target and really tried to run hard after it. But I will say I did it one time with an organization that didn't have like Salesforce and a lot of sales enablement tools or data, and it was much harder to set measurable goals. Whereas where I'm at now, it's like we have a sales team that really is very metrics driven, and that has been a huge help. So I would say, like, if you're going at it, I know sometimes like really expensive tools like Salesforce or HubSpot, right? Like they just don't make sense sometimes. But to be able to even just have a modest tech stack and see what people are doing on your website, and to be able to just be able to go back into Salesforce and research a lot of like closed lost deals, closed won deals, and pull that data, create audiences and things like that. Like that was probably the first foundational game changer, and being able to even think about, okay, these are the goals that we're going to set for marketing. So yeah, but absolutely, there were always pretty aggressive goals, revenue goals, lead gen goals. And that is, to me, I think more helpful than in the past, I think, where it was just like, hey, just do the best you can.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're getting tactical. So let's get into a bit of a strategy session for everyone watching and tuning in. What do you believe are the priorities So let's say we've literally just come into this organization. We quite literally are the first marketing hire. You mentioned some points there in regards to kind of chatting to the sales team, understanding the metrics they care about. You touched a bit on CRM. Is that the very first port of call that you believe that we should be doing in the first few days, or is there a step kind of zero that we should take before any of that even takes place?
Yeah, I think that there are two steps that you should be taking at the same time in tandem. One, I definitely think building internal trust and relationship with the C-suite, the sales team, right? That's huge. And that should be happening relationally, I think, in a win that you get in your first 30 days. But then while you're doing that, the most game-changing thing I think is to know the ins and outs of your product. And I remember when I was first working for a B2B tech startup, and I was trying to build the marketing engine with just a very surface level understanding of all the different processes in the software. And I was really struggling. And one night I just said, okay. And let me also say this. There are some tech companies out there where their software is not super complex. It's pretty straightforward. But the organization that I worked for, their platform was a powerhouse. It took like over 100 different processes that were previously done by paper in an extremely archaic way and brought it all together under one machine. And a lot of SaaS platforms and their marketing, they say all in one. And, I mean, we joke about all of the different phrases that we use
Yeah,
to
sure.
market software products, but it really covered over like 100 processes that an average department would have to all do in separate ways manually, right? And so my marketing really started to take off and get set on fire when I became a student of the product. And I
Okay.
really understood the user experience, how they were approaching, like what problem they were trying to solve by coming and doing this in the software. So, there's so much out there for marketers about what to do in your first 90 days, right? Um, be a student of your audience as much as you can, learn as much as you can about your ICP and surveys and feedback and interviews and all of that stuff. And I completely 100% agree. But if you're working for a tech company, I think it's equally important to just saturate yourself in the product and know it in and out, because I think once you get a really strong understanding of all the different workflows in your product, and then you marry that with all of the market research you're doing about your ICP and, the different problems that you solve, then it's almost like when you sit down to do any marketing activities or collateral, I think it just flows really naturally. So be a student of your product first and foremost, I think, is for anybody in B2B SaaS, like the absolute game changer that'll take it to the next level and help you accelerate much faster. Sometimes I think when I look at like marketing speak or people speaking on LinkedIn about what to do in your first 90 days, they are relentless about talking about the audience, but knowing your product and knowing how it's different from your competitors and where the pain points are that you solve, I think is equally important.
Nice points. I like that. Be a student of the product. We'll have to snip that one out for a video clip.
Yeah.
So,
and I wouldn't work for Wildsparq if I didn't just say, like, in your first 90 days, like, who you are as a team member, who you are as a person, is so important long term for your success. I don't think we talk about that enough either, right? Like the trust that you build internally with your team, making their wins your wins, making their wins your priority. Like I'm so immeasurably grateful that that's what we do at Wildsparq, right? Like those are the types of traits we try to cultivate in every workplace in North America. And that's our goal. Our end goal is to help every manager be a better person. And so I think just having a posture of humility is a game changer too. I know that we get these metrics that are put up against us, and they want 1 million inbounds on day 3, right? But then also I think being willing to show that you're hungry and you're learning and you just want to sit and be a good active listener and kind of understand what is it like for the VP of operations or the CEO or the director of sales, right? Like that's going to help you a lot as well. And so I wouldn't neglect just being a great manager, being a great leader, being a great human being to the team that you're on now. That really helps too. That helps you move fast.
Got it. Some awesome points. So there's a lot there. There's a lot to think about. So something that's come to my mind straight away, mainly because I'm a terrible balancer of time. Every time I look at the time on the calendar, I realize I'm running late for a meeting. So
Right.
understanding the product, you touched a little bit on understanding the product inside out, understanding the problems it solves. You touched a bit on customer calls. And we've also talked about kind of speaking to your internal teams, be it VPs, sales, leadership, operations, etc., depending on size of your org and who's within it. How do you balance out that time? Because I imagine it's quite a lot to do. And then also I imagine we've got to actually do some kind of work eventually to get to that marketing. I'm not sure how late that comes, or when you encourage people to then get into, I guess, getting their hands dirty and start doing that kind of tactical stuff. Like, how did you balance it out?
That's a great question. I think I implemented 2 time management systems that I'm still like trying to be a student of and get better at every day. But the one was just, I would set aside and this is where I think sometimes only marketing as a department deals with this, but like you're expected to know every department in and out, know the product, know your audience, all this stuff. But then you're also expected to like create content, and there's this unique balance in marketing of all the relational and leadership things that you do, especially for a startup, right? If you're working for a larger company, probably not as much of an issue for you, right? You're probably not doing leadership related things as well as tactical marketing that you're executing on, right? But it really is very unique to marketing, I think, and startup marketing. And I would do a really good job of blocking off days that were just strategic days. Like, this is just meetings. This is just research. This is, I'm managing this contractor. I know I'm going to have to sit down with them for an hour and hand over research and cast a vision for my product and what I want our marketing department to look like and all of those things. Right. And so, I wouldn't necessarily time block an entire day into different activities. I would block off entire days for specific activities. So like for me, Monday and Wednesday are my strategic days. That's when
Gotcha.
I have check-ins with sales. That's when we have pipeline meetings, right? On Mondays at noon, first of the month, right? It's like, so, and then there were days that I had to be relentless about covering up my calendar and being like, this is a tactical day. Like I need to execute on this for the website or this for social or, everything else, get this tech product set up or something like that. So, I had to be really good about that. And I don't think that ever changes until you scale to the point where you have somebody who's just leading, and you have titles of, CMO, VP, director, manager, specialist, all that structure, right? And then in addition to that, working with contractors, I think, me personally, like, finding contractors that you trust or smaller agencies that you really trust has also been a game changer for the time management thing too. Like if you have a bucket, generally when you're in a B2B startup and you're managing the marketing department, you get like a bucket of money. And it's like, hey, when you're building your budget, you get to decide how you're going to allocate this bucket, right? And so I've always looked at those dollars of like, how can I buy expertise and buy velocity, right? And so there is a time and a place for hiring people, but I think in the startup sense, finding an individual that you can really trust and who will do great work for you and they'll do it quickly is a game changer. And a lot of times the better move in those first few years than hiring. So that helped a lot too in terms of managing my time. And then the last thing I'll say is just like little tools like Eat the Frog, Pomodoro time management, the Eisenhower decision matrix. Those are all things that we like teach in Wildsparq. But like whatever it is for you, for me, eating the frog is so important. Doing the like most difficult task at the beginning of the day when I'm fresh, simple things like that, they really do help. But you just have to figure out what's right for you.
What's the Eisenhower movement? I've heard of Eat the Frog doing the most terrible thing for the first thing in the day. What was the other one?
Yeah, so the Eisenhower matrix is like a grid that basically helps you balance work that is most urgent and most impactful. Something that my boss always says at Wildsparq is that you need to free up your capacity for the most high impact, high value work. And like the Eisenhower matrix is just a tool we use like in Wildsparq. And that I think is really well known, at least in the US, like for people to just sort of say, here are all my tasks. I'm going to put them in this grid, and then I'm going to do the things that are not only the most urgent, but are the most impactful.
Got it. And what did you, when you first came into your roles, what did you kind of make notes, or did you discuss it with the team when you thought kind of the first, I don't know, Q1 or Q2, however you set your targets? How did you define what was going to be the most impactful, let's say, target or result you wanted to achieve? And then what were perhaps the key things that you were going to do to bring that to fruition, to make that happen?
Yeah. So I will say that both startups that I've worked for had very different revenue models. One, they've also had very different like go-to-market models, whether it's completely product-led growth and sort of like almost relational guerrilla marketing, but then also more like digital marketing, traditional sales process, traditional sales cycle, all that, right? So, how did I define those priorities? I think that there's always the tension between brand building, long-term strategies, and then immediate pipeline and revenue now. You'll never get away from that, no matter how much AI we release or,
Yep.
But I think that being able to break things up into a percentage has been really helpful. And that's something I've even seen development teams do. I think like being also a student of how an agile team runs in software development can really help you as a marketer. I'm grateful that the last 2 jobs I've had, I've really been able to get a good look at how software gets built and how it gets built efficiently and then deployed and iterated upon. And it's a constantly moving wheel. And that can really help with you breaking down your work almost into like a backlog, where 80% of this is strategic work, 20% of this is like immediate pipeline work. But so yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but like I've just had a lot of different I've had a lot of really good collaboration across functional teams to where a framework like the Agile framework is something that I've been able to incorporate into how I break down what kind of work we're doing. So try to keep it around in those first 2 years, try to keep it around like, 30% sales enablement, 30% like people who are in market right now, actively looking to buy, warm type of people that you want to get in front of. And then 70% of it is building future pipeline, building demand. And that's kind of how I've always tried to break it down. I've never really had like the benefit of, hey, I have this giant department and I'm able to delegate just sales enablement to this group of people and things like that. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's basically how I've tried to break it down. And I really got that inspiration from just watching how software development teams like pull in, here's like fixing bugs, and we're going to do 10% of that. Like here's long-term strategic work, here's infrastructure work that we're building out, like in our product architecture, that type of stuff. So that was always really something that helped me organize my work as a marketer.
Yeah. Some sound advice. I imagine that's, being a marketer, probably one of the toughest things if you've got certain targets against hitting MQL numbers, SQL numbers, certain pipeline metrics. How do you balance? You touched on it there. You gave a nice kind of percentage breakdown, like those short-term wins, like spending a load of cash on Google ads, review sites, LinkedIn ads, or wherever we can capture someone in market now, as opposed to those longer-term plays, those other channels that are more foundational, more organic, more building up demand for the long term, kind of positioning our brand as the choice. So when those prospects that don't need it now, but eventually do have the problems we solve, we're the only kind of one of the top vendors that come to mind. It's like, that's all good and well, but that's not an easy sell to leadership when you're perhaps a marketing team of 1 or a marketing team of 2. And depending on what your team's like, sales may be hammering you for leads, or leadership may be hammering you for leads. So I imagine it's always quite a difficult balance to make.
Yeah, it is. And I honestly say, if you have the benefit of money, if you have the benefit of some budget, I like to put that, but like, and I've learned this through making mistakes. I didn't feel this way straight out the gate, right? But like, most like VC backed SaaS companies, right? They have the budget to build out this full funnel. Whereas, at a startup, you have limited funds, and it's like, hey, where are we going to put our money? And a lot of times, if you think about the long-term paid media play, it doesn't work out to your benefit, and you'll probably lose your job before some of the long-term strategies for your paid media work off, right? Like building out this gigantic LinkedIn funnel where you're just focusing on the first 8 months of getting people through, problem aware, brand aware, all that stuff. You probably cannot do that if you're working at a startup with very limited funding. But I think what you can do is put your money into high intent channels. And I think then grind and use kind of your manual labor to work on the larger long-term demand gen stuff, right? And so, like for us at Wildsparq, we'll put money into paid search for very specific, exact terms that shows that somebody is within our ICP and they're actively in market. Or we'll put the money, like we partnered with you, Breaking B2B, and we said, hey, nobody has ever really gone after our competitors. There's zero content out there comparing these legacy vendors that have been out there and doing leadership development, some of them for 100 years, 50 years, right? And so taking the money and shifting the mindset to, hey, I know, like once I get them in front of my sales team, they're going to be won over because I have like the most wonderful people on my sales team and I have a great product, right? A product that has disrupted this legacy leadership development market where it's super expensive, it's super time consuming, it's super boring. Wildsparq is none of those things, right? And so being able to take the money and go, hey, I'm just going to put it into high intent channels and get in front of people who are actively looking for what I have. And I know if they get in front of sales, we'll at least be a strong contender for what they're looking for. So putting money into like something like paid search, putting money into G2, putting money into some of those immediate SEO wins that you can get for like competitor comparison pages, alternative searches, those types of things. I personally think that's the lowest hanging fruit for a B2B startup, rather than focusing on doing an entire funnel that you pay at every step of the process. And then, I mean, if you have great people, I think a lot of that top of the funnel brand awareness stuff you can achieve through community building, really likable branding, podcasting, different things that you do to really provide value for people, and you kind of give it away for free. And they are immediately attached to your brand because you're helping them in whatever, like you help people do SEO, you help people create websites for vanity or for purpose and for sales and inbound leads and not vanity, right? So I think you use your sort of sweat equity to build out the community building top of the funnel things that really a lot of companies have the luxury of paying for.
Yeah. I'm going to be biased and agree with you naturally as we do some work together, but I like the take because there is so much on LinkedIn if you're connected to any B2B tech marketers, or generally on B2B tech podcasts, so much about creating demand, building demand for folks that aren't in market yet. But like you said, if you're a startup marketing team, that really doesn't make sense to put all your time and resources, cash and energy into that in the early days. It makes way more sense to exhaust that bottom of the funnel, like you said there, and understand like who is quite literally needing our offer right here, right now, whether that is on Google organic search, Google paid search, review sites, or whatever makes sense depending on your industry and where your target market go. Like exhaust that. I mean, use the limited cash you have to get those inbounds because those folks are ready to have a sales conversation. Why would you mess around kind of doing all this other stuff, yeah, by all means, if your team can do some organic stuff on LinkedIn, if you can build out a podcast, start educating your buyers in that way, for sure do it. Like you say, sweat equity, it makes sense, just like we do with this show and you folks do with your podcast. But yeah, I mean, because you've got such limited time and such limited cash, like anything else to me just seems mad unless you've got that extra resource.
Yeah, and I think and I learned this the hard way, so I can share some experience to keep you from making that mistake. But like, if you take your budget and you dump a ton of it into that demand gen, top of the funnel, future market stuff straight out the gate, like you're just not, when you're in B2B startup marketing, like you work really hard and you need to eventually see some wins just for your morale and for team morale and for your position and the trust that you have with the people on the team, and when you're working for a startup, like everybody's really bought in to like building this thing and getting it to scale and making it right. And so, you want to feel like the people around you are pulling their weight. You want to feel like the people around you are as bought in as you are and they're delivering, right? And so it's not wrong or uninformed or unintelligent to want to put the money into the long-term top of the funnel stuff. And there are, I think, situations where it makes sense. But overall, I think if you put your money there, you're going to have a tough start. Like the first year or two, like you're not going to get a ton of wins. And you're going to constantly have to explain yourself in front of senior leadership. And after a while, beating the drum of this will pay off long term, like, it doesn't necessarily buy you what you need in the short term to then get the budget that you need long term to really do the things that you want to do. So, yeah, I would say it's best for you and for your team to go after the low-hanging fruit, bottom of the funnel stuff, people who are actively looking for what you have right now. I would focus your first year or two just on that, because that can be huge for you.
Yeah, sound advice. In terms of, you touched on a little bit there, in terms of industries and having large scale competitors, what have you seen success with when it comes to finding gaps, perhaps the big boys, the massive brands in the space are perhaps maybe sleeping on, or any gaps or ways to success that you've seen?
Yeah, so there's a dance here. There's a delicate balance of doing this but not showing your cards, right, to your competitors and things like that. But I think once you start to win over clients and start to build a client pool, like any of them that you can really talk to about your competitors and like learn the things that frustrated them about the competitor, or any way that you can like get your hand on your competitor's product and see, what hoops they make people jump through or processes they create that really are just completely unnecessary. And it only serves the company. It doesn't serve the users. And they have a mentality of like, this is how it's always been done. Right. And so being able to get all of that information and then having the courage, it takes bravery to be willing to do this. And it also takes like a level of self-awareness and honesty too, right? Like you can't just go after your competitor if what you're delivering on is, or say you're delivering on, you're not actually delivering on, right? So, but yeah, I think learning as much as you can about them and their pain points from clients who maybe came over from them, or getting the opportunity to look at their product and see all the ways that yours just gives you an extra edge. And then be willing to like put yourself out on those channels of like those SEO alternative articles, or like platforms where you do software reviews. Those are huge. But I think too, just in general, that stuff should permeate all of the places you talk about your product. Like it should be, you don't necessarily have to name a competitor, but if you're going off with sales and you guys are trying to land a big client and you're making a presentation or a pitch, like marketing needs to be involved to highlight that stuff, right? And to really cast vision for how all of these pain points that your competitors have created for them, you solve. So you want to just make sure when you do it though that you're ready. Like you don't want to just start. I think one thing that happens in SEO, it's like, oh well, I just want to get something out there so that it's indexed, right? Because SEO tends to be more of like a long-term play, right? Make sure you get your ducks in a row and make sure that you have really good sound, attractive content before you go off, because a lot of times your competitors have the money to just outsource it to somebody or give it to somebody who that's all they can focus on for the week. It's just how they can blast and destroy you, right? But yeah, both organizations that I've worked for, going after competitors was huge for us. But that we weren't one of these emerging technologies where we didn't have, like, we were in sort of a red ocean where there are sharks swimming around and it was somewhat saturated. And so part of our positioning was to be a disruptor and to be like, hey, this old process that they've made you jump through, it only serves them. With us, we save you time, we save you money. And it, it shouldn't really be that way. So I don't know if I'm doing a good job of talking about tactically what that looks like. I think tactically, it's, how do you do that through SEO? How do you do that through your web presence? How do you talk about it in a tasteful way, like on your social, and make sure you incorporate it into a lot of your sales process? I think is a way to do it as well. I would say, like, for us at Wildsparq this year, within the last 6 months, we've really started to gain traction with that stuff that we've done. And we've got people in the pipeline now that were looking at us because they wanted an alternative, some legacy competitor.
No, I think that's smart. I mean, understanding those questions from like recently onboarded customers, clients, like, why did you choose us opposed to a competitor? I mean, let's be honest, when folks are going to Google or a review site or any other way that they procure new technology vendors or B2B vendors in general, they're usually comparing 2 or 3 options at least. So it's always, like you said, useful insight just to know, like, what was the tipping point? Like, you've got a lot of choice out there. Like, why did you choose us over those competitors? And if you can get that kind of insight, i.e., you solved this that they didn't, or I preferred your sales process, or your marketing was more tasteful, or you made it more seamless, or your responses were quicker, whatever that was, if there's regular patterns in that feedback that you can then leverage on your messaging, the website, your articles, ads, it's super useful if that gives you a bit of a differentiator in the marketplace, for sure.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And I think leaning into people, for the most part, when you interview a customer or you're interviewing a new client or a prospect, right? Like, there's a level of politeness that they're going to have. They probably don't come on the call and then just spend 20 minutes in a therapy session blasting your competitor, right? Like, most people have more tact and self-awareness. They're not going to do that. However, I think that one thing that has been really helpful for me is, like, pushing a prospect or a client to get a little bit more granular about what created pain points for them with a competitor, right? Like, talk to me about literally the buttons you would click, or talk to me about the process of uploading and adding new seats to the platform, or adding data to, like, and you would not believe the gold mine of marketing talking points and selling points you get from that. So, I would say if you're interviewing prospects and clients about a competitor, and really push them to get into the weeds and granular. Like, tell me every little thing that you can remember that just added extra clicks to your life, or extra processes, or you knew you had to set aside like 2 blocks of or 2 hours of time every month to go through this process, and it just became part of your workflow that now you can have back, right? Like, get them to be really specific with you about every little thing from a competitor's product or process or service. And you would not believe how much gold is within those details that you can leverage in a way that, I mean, everybody will say, oh, save time, save money, right? Like, everybody kind of uses very vague talking points on their website. But man, if you can get really specific about what makes you different, you can get like a table, like, that is a straight comparison of little tiny things. You might not think at a high level that resonates with you, but like, it does really resonate with your ICP. And especially people who are in software all day long to do their job, like, little things like that really matter.
That's awesome. I mean, that's something that I rarely see or hear from marketers. I hear it a lot because I've interviewed a lot of kind of sales folk on this podcast, sales leaders as well as marketing leaders. It's something that salespeople often talk about, especially during like sales discovery calls. Like whatever the prospect gives as the pain point or the problem isn't usually, you've normally got to dig 1 or 2 levels deeper. Like, for example, we need a CRM. Why is that? Well, everything's being slower. When you say everything's slow, what do you mean? Well, it's taking us hours to enter all these details into Google Sheets. Why is that an issue? Well, it's taking up 5 hours where we could be prospecting each day. And why is that an issue? Well, we're not hitting our dial target. We're not hitting our appointment book target, meaning we're down on revenue. Okay. So what's that causing against Q1 targets? When you dig into stuff like that, then like you say, you get to the gold, you get to the real answers, you get to the real problems, the bleeding neck issues, which are causing them expenses, headcount, revenue, whatever. And that's something I don't see or hear a lot from marketers. So being able to do that is super effective to then leverage for all aspects of marketing, messaging, content.
Yeah, it's true. And software is emotional. This is something like my husband is an academic. He uses educational software. And when he uses certain platforms for different universities that he works for. And like when he is in one, it creates a lot of happiness for him. When he is in another, it creates a lot of anger and frustration because it's tedious and the user experience is like software is emotional. I know that like software is extremely quantifiable in terms of the development process and story points and velocity and all these different things and like the ones and zeros and like I get it. But at the end of the day, like software makes people feel things. And you as a marketer you're not too good to get granular with them on that. Like find out what are the little things that elicit certain feelings and emotions in them, and then use that to cast a vision for what their life could be if they came to your service or product, So yeah, I always try to hit on that as much as I can. Like software makes you feel things, and that's probably the greatest dial that a marketer who works for a B2B SaaS company can turn up.
Love it. Great advice. Rachel, we'll have to get you on for a part 2 in a future episode to dive into this in a bit more depth as I run out of time now. But with that, really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, hands-on advice, and we can really feel that you've been in the trenches, you've actually done the work yourself. So I want to thank you for coming on and sharing that. So with that, please do tell us more about how everyone tuning in can connect with yourself, a bit more about Wildsparq and anything you'd like to share with our audience.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Rachael Merritt. But really, at the end of the day, you cut me open, I bleed Wildsparq red. So if you're here, I'd love for you to go give Wildsparq a follow on LinkedIn. We just try to give away a ton of value to help you be a better human, a better leader, and anything you need to be great from the boardroom to the family room. Would love for you to give us a follow on there. We'll make you laugh. We'll make you smile. And we'll also help just share some tidbits that hopefully improve your life. So you can look me up on LinkedIn, Rachael Merritt, but more importantly, I'd love for you to go follow Wildsparq and check out wildsparq.com if you're in the market for something that helps you develop the soft skills of your people in a fun and enjoyable, engaging way. Wildsparq is that product. So thank you for having me. I've always been a big fan of everything that you create as a content creator. That's how I initially came to be engaged with you and your firm and had you do work for us. So keep grinding because you're really helping people.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks very much for sharing your wisdom. We're going to put all of those links below. As always, if you want to join thousands of legends, enjoying the daily emails or past podcast episodes, or even to apply to work with our team, head over to breakingb2b.com. And a big thank you for you, the audience, for tuning in. We should catch you on the next one for more no BS B2B marketing tips to grow your business, grow your revenue. See you soon.